Hello and welcome to the Locker Room, where women talk about sports. I'm Sara Gross and I am here with Kelly O'Mara. Hi, Kelly.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good.
So you just got back from Texas, right? You were in Texas at the Triathlon Business International Conference?
Yes.
Talking about sport. How was that?
It was pretty good. I went to Dallas, Texas to do a presentation about diversity in triathlon at the Triathlon Business International Conference.
And everybody was like, great diversity. We're on board. Sign us up.
If only. It was interesting because I really felt like the room was straight down the line. I felt like there was a lot of support, a lot of social media support from the outside for the conversation that I was trying to introduce. And then on the flip side, there are a lot of people who still feel that that conversation about increased diversity in their businesses and in triathlon as a sport in general doesn't really affect them. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's not really people against it. It's just a group of people who think it doesn't affect them. So on one hand, it was really positive, and on the other hand, there's still a long way to go.
Which, sums up life right now.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Exactly. That's kind of how I felt about it. Real life. So this week on the show, we're actually talking about a rather important but somber topic of sexual abuse of young athletes by coaches, why it's so prevalent, and what we can do to make change. So later on, we're catching up with cyclist Missy Erickson and also a former Olympic swimmer and women in sport advocate Nancy Hogshead-Makar. But first, the news. Kelly, tell us about this. There's a blind triathlete who is being banned from racing with her male guide.
Yeah, and I understand she's actually filed a lawsuit against both USA Triathlon and the Ironman Corporation so her problem is that she has very specific requirements. Like, she's blind and she's deaf, so she needs, I think, or partially hearing. So she needs someone who does like a very specific kind of tactile sign language, but who can also complete an Ironman at her given speed. And so obviously there's not that many people that meet those requirements. And so the only person that she could find was male. They kind of let her do it last year, but now they're not letting her do it. And they say it's because of the changing tense, which obviously makes no sense, right? The changing tense, like one's male, one's female. And they're saying that that's why she can't have a male guide, because he can't go in the female changing tent.
It seems like a ridiculous reason.
It seems like ridiculous. Like, that is so fixable if you wanted to fix it. Like, it's not a problem. So then there's obviously other issues. But once this lawsuit came forward, it turns out that this is like disproportionately affecting women, because obviously there's fewer women that do triathlon. If they are very good, more people that meet their requirements will be male. And so if they aren't allowed to use a male guide, then they just can't do it.
I was kind of surprised that the article didn't mention the performance factor, or that didn't come up at all. In terms of when you're on a tandem bike, someone with a stronger cyclist is going to have an advantage. And I don't know how they deal with that in paratriathlon, but that seems to me to be an issue in terms of who the guides are, even regardless of gender, but even more so with the gender piece in there.
Yeah, I don't totally understand the tandem bikes, but there's something about you have to be fairly equal in ability for it to work right. I'm not totally sure, but that's my understanding of like how they're designed.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, it seems like something that we could resolve if we wanted to resolve it, but instead she's having to sue the triathlon companies.
Right. It's just typical.
Typical.
So also in the last couple of weeks, there's been a lot of doping news, in particular Nicole Cook, this British cyclist who's been standing up against her federation and really speaking out about doping in cycling.
Yeah, I think a lot of the news that has been coming out has been variations of athletes coming forward. In biathlon, like all the athletes made some sort of petition that, they want former dopers kicked out of their sport. Because as more and more news is coming out, there was like a German documentary, there's been more like Russian whistleblowers. It's seeming, that this is a widespread problem on a deep level. And so you're hearing more and more athletes say, this is not okay. What's interesting about Nicole Cook is she did not limit her criticism to doping. She was like, right. British cycling doesn't give women money. They don't give women opportunities. I don't trust them. They're covering up doping. Of course, she also is retired, so she can say all those things.
Well, have at her, Nicole. I mean, really, you might as well say what you're thinking. I say good for her.
Yeah.
So our hype of the week this week, we have to talk about the Women's March. I feel like that was a positive thing that happened in the US and around the world, all women coming together. Even in the airport yesterday, I saw a lady in a wheelchair wearing a pussy hat.
Nice.
It's like, yes. And I said something to her. I think, nice hat. And she's like, thank you. And we shared a moment, you know?
And you shared a moment. That's good. That's glad. Small battles. Yeah, there was it was over 3 million people marched in the US, I believe. And I think what was important is, at least here, what I knew firsthand, there were people that were marching that voted for him or didn't vote for her, or were, not, there are a variety of opinions, but they wanted to all come together and say that, okay, look, even if I support his economic policy, there was 10 women that accused him of sexual assault, and that's not okay. And we're not for this conversation about kicking out Muslims and, the transphobic laws that are being passed. So there were people that we can all come together on some topics and say hey, let's be okay with everyone, and we're going to rally around that.
Right. And there were a number of athletes as well, female and male, that participated.
Yeah, there was a bunch of the female, the women's soccer players that marched in DC. LeBron came out in support, who was probably the biggest name. So yeah, which obviously raises a lot of questions about if athletes should just stick to sports, which is what you always hear.
Yeah, you do, but I don't think that's a question. What are you going to do? Stay home? Oh, I really want to march, but I'm an athlete, so I'll stay home.
Yeah, no. Then, yeah. I mean, I'm also a reporter, even though I don't report on politics. And I had a lot of friends being like, well, you can't march. Or, I mean, I didn't because I had other stuff to do. But yeah, so you're so if all the athletes, all the people loosely associated with media, who is allowed
to march? Yeah. And that was the beauty of it, was that we just didn't care anymore. And lots of women went and marched. So Kelly, you have a gripe for us. Tell us your gripe of the week.
So I have a friend, a colleague, not so much a friend, a work associate, who did a story about the Patriots struggling with what she called their Trump problem, because they've been moderately connected to him. Some of their athletes, head coach, managers have been in favor of him. And the problem is, I mean, that's fine, whatever. But the problem is that the Patriots fan base is heavily anti-Trump. So they're losing fans, which is a problem a lot of companies are having right now. It's an interesting point as people are trying to figure out what line to walk to not piss off half the country. Right. On either side.
People in business and journalism.
In business are trying to figure this out.
Right. Okay.
So she wrote this story. I thought it was just interesting. She became a massive target for coordinated online abuse about, you go back, stick to fashion.
Wow.
And then, I mean, she mentions her parents in the story because they were Brady support, fans, whatever. And people started calling her parents' house and threatening her, which is crazy. That's not okay. That's insane. And the thing is, you can say, oh, well, that's just one off. There are always people that are bad people. But the fact is, on an aggregate level, this happens over and over and over to women. It happens particularly to women in sports and politics and topics that are considered male. And it happens in a targeted fashion. And it's getting worse. I'm hearing more and more stories. And we know that to be true. And we don't have a solution. All anyone says is, oh, just don't engage with them. Just ignore them. Just ignore them. But if you ignore them, or if you're forced off Twitter or Facebook or the internet, you're losing out on, at least in my job, my profession, you're losing out on a network of contacts that's where I get jobs from Facebook. I get sponsors from Twitter. And if I got off those platforms, it's costing me money. And so it feels like we'll just force these women out of spaces that they need to make money that will cost them intellectual capital and time. And it's not just oh, well, Facebook's just it's not a big deal. It actually is a big deal.
People should be able to occupy those spaces or be involved in those spaces without being bullied.
Yeah, I mean, it's getting so bad. I have friends who are scared, not because anything specific. I mean, bad things have happened to them, as I was saying that, but because they're scared that this is going to be they're going to say something that's going to be the thing that gets randomly latched onto, and they're going to start getting rape threats, and they're going to get people calling their house, and they're going to get people going and finding their personal information, because that happens. It happens routinely. Acquaintances, it happens to, and you just don't know. And so if we're all scared of that, that's wasting so many resources out there.
Right. It is Very scary. And something similar happened on social media to our first guest, Missy Erickson. She's a cyclist who came out recently about her sexual abuse. Tell us a little bit about.
So Missy was a 2016 Olympian. She's a track cyclist. She's won records, national champion like 6 times. She actually had come out to her friends, I think, before, but she wrote kind of a first-person essay in Bicycling about the sexual assault she experienced when she was a teenager. A man who was associated with her team had a position of power over her, kind of, was like, oh, well, of course you want to do this, and just sort of forced her to have sex. And then, forced her into a relationship that she didn't necessarily want to be in. And some of the details are terrifying, right? She tried to go out with a guy in high school, and he stalked her and followed her around. He was really controlling and obsessive and obviously abusive. And for a long time, she didn't want to speak out because she thought it would affect her cycling career. And so now she's come forward, now that she's semi-retired, made it through the 2016 Olympics. And I think that Bicycling story, it was all over my internet. I think it really caught on with a lot of people because it was pretty detailed and pretty clear about how these things happen. So we talked to her and to get more perspective about why she wanted to come forward.
Right. She joined you yesterday. She was in her car. Where was she going?
She was actually, she's only semi-retired, so she still has a lot of training camps, and she's a fit specialist. So she was headed up to Canada, and we actually talked as she was driving right before she got to the border. So it was very quick. But I think, I appreciated her taking the time to talk to us. Hi, Missy. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, of course.
I read your piece in Bicycling where you came out about the sexual assault you went through in cycling, which sounded terrible. I wanted to know kind of what prompted you to come out now, to go into that publication, to start talking about it.
I actually posted it first on social media end of last year, and Bicycling reached out to me and started having to post to kind of further elaborate on my experience, what happened. But, it happened 9 years ago, and for the longest time, while I was racing, I never wanted to fully deal with it, I suppose you could say. And so I've kind of come to terms with myself and everything that happened. And in lieu of my recent semi-retirement and, just kind of enjoying cycling now, I wanted to be able to help other people because I know this is a very common thing that happens, unfortunately. And we don't know that it's common because a lot of people just don't want to talk about it. So I just wanted to reach out and share my own experience, and I've had so many people approach me already from me posting about my experience, which kind of validates my whole reasoning for reaching out. So ultimately, I just want to help everybody else if I can.
That was going to be my next question was, have you had people reach out to you? Have there been girls who have come, contacted you about their own experiences?
I have, all ages too. Women much older than me, women my age, and unfortunately, girls who are a lot younger than me have, all in private messages, and, they've given me their own words of support, and it's sad, but it's also something, like I said, that happens a lot more commonly that we just don't know about because nobody wants to talk about it, and it's both disheartening to get a message like that, but it's also inspiring to know that, I'm not the only person, and the more people who share about it and the more people that talk about it, the more we're going to be able to help each other.
No, that makes sense. Do you think people are talking about it more? I realized that it has been in the news more and more frequently. There have been more and more investigative stories. Do you feel like people are becoming more aware of some of the issues, with coaching and sexual assault?
I think the more we talk about it, the more aware people are going to be. I don't know if we're becoming more aware about it because it's happening more frequently, which I really hope not. But I think it's just because we're all finding our own voice, and, we're becoming equal to men within sport, or at least there's a big push for women to be equal to men in sport. And along with that comes a lot of power and us being able to speak out. And, this is all part of being able to speak out, is finding our own voice and finding strength there.
Why do you think it's so common for girls in all sports? Is it something about sports? Is it something we're doing wrong? I'm not sure.
I'll never say we're doing anything wrong because for the longest time I thought I was doing something wrong and I thought it was my fault. And it very much so was not my fault. I think women in general, we're very caring people and we want to please everybody. And when somebody has a position of power over us and we want please them, it puts us in a very vulnerable position. Ultimately, a coach is and does have a position of power over any type of athlete. So when that coach abuses that power, it's not that we're weak or that we can't stand up for ourselves. It's just we're sometimes become afraid and, you don't really know what to say or you don't know what to do because you're in that position. So I think it's a problem in sport. I think it's a problem where the wrong people are coaching and the wrong people are in power. And it's just going to take education and giving the knowledge to the right people to stop it from happening.
I know that is kind of what happened to you. There was, a power dynamic and you had a coach and a man much older than you. And so you feel like you want to listen to them. Do you think that that's unique to cycling? I guess, is it worse in cycling than in other sports?
I don't think so. I think cycling gives a unique perspective because there's so much one-on-one time. There's one-on-one time going for bike rides and traveling to races and watching videos and all of that. So there is a lot more one-on-one time. There's a lot more individual contact versus, a group sport like basketball or so-and-so. But I think it happens all over sport. I don't think it's just cycling. I don't think it's just any other one sport. It's widespread, and I think I've heard a lot of these stories come out of cycling because I'm in that world. But in general, I think it happens everywhere.
I think that's probably true. I mean, we hear about it in gymnastics, swimming, everywhere. So do you feel better having come forward now? Kind of what are our next steps?
If in one respect, I feel like a big weight has been lifted off my shoulders, just being able to share my experience and get that out there. But at the same time, it is a bit terrifying. So, some people take it in a negative way and, there's always a little bit of victim shaming that happens, unfortunately. There's going to be those people that don't believe my story, but, at the same time, the only thing that I wish to gain out of this is to be able to help everybody else. So to each their own, it feels good to get it out there and knowing that so many people have come forward and have asked me for help. That's just exactly what I wanted to happen. So I'm very grateful to be able to help anybody that I can.
I think we appreciate it. It is always crazy to me that they're still, victim shaming of it.
Right. I think that it's always going to happen, especially with the social media world. All we can do is help support one another.
I did notice your Twitter is protected now, so I would imagine you got a lot of tweets.
Yeah, after posting that, I had to protect a bunch of my stuff and, kind of take a little downtime for a little while. Now I'm back, so you'll be able to see all my witty pretty soon.
Well, thank you so much for talking to us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I think that Missy standing up and others who stand up and tell their story, I think that's a really important part of the process of getting these things out of the shadows, talking about them more, and ultimately preventing sexual abuse among young girls and boys. I really admire her.
Oh, yeah. And I was kind of obviously surprised that she still got some abuse from people. He said she was asking for it, which is just sort of like, come on, guys.
Right.
But I am a big believer in, if we share our experiences, like that's all we can do. And if things are not in the shadows, then it's easier to deal with them. So.
Absolutely. And it's a surprisingly common problem with young athletes and coaches. And the question is obviously, how do we protect our young people? So our next interview is with Nancy Hogshead McCarr. She's a former swimmer. She has 3 gold medals and 1 silver medal from the 1984 Olympic Games. She's trained as a lawyer and known in her expertise in sport. She's been an advocate and author in the field of women's equity. She recently founded Champion Women, which is a nonprofit leading efforts to advocate for equality and accountability in sport. She focuses on areas of equal play, sexual harassment, abuse and assault in sport, pregnancy, LGBT discrimination. So she's really doing a lot for women in sport. Hi, Nancy. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
I understand you've been involved in protecting women and girls for many years. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved?
Sure. So my first law review article I taught for 12 years was on the issue of sexual abuse of college athletes. And I was mostly thinking about the power that coaches have over athletes. They've got scholarship and playing time and favoritism. So all the implications that sort of fell under Title IX. And then I had the good fortune of getting to work with the University of Colorado after there was a settlement in a terrible factual case. Lisa Simpson was raped by football recruits. And pretty much everybody at the school lost their job. The president, the athletic director, the football coach, the blah, 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 everybody was gone. And so I was hired to go and work with the school for 5 years. I then accepted a position. I was a senior director of advocacy for the Women's Sports Foundation. And so I started getting calls from not students who were part of a school, but who were under club programs. So when somebody called and they had been sexually abused, under a school, I knew what to do. There's a sort of clear path, if you will. When somebody has been sexually abused under a club system, there is no clear path. And so I was kind of figuring out, like, oh my gosh, well, what do I do to help? And, as an attorney, that's your job. As a professor, I was teaching the Sports Act. So the United States, our Olympic system is covered by a statute that actually creates the Olympic Committee and gives them the use of the Olympic rings in perpetuity. And all of the 47 different national governing bodies that regulate and people are members of those sports are underneath, if you will, that Olympic Committee. So I started working with some of these national governing bodies and realized that they really did not want to deal with the issue. They wanted the police to handle it, the clubs to handle it, the parents to handle it, even if they knew about a pedophile that was going from club to club to club around the country. They weren't going to do anything about it. They just sort of held up, sort of shrugged their shoulders like, gosh, isn't that awful?
You've obviously been involved in this for a while. What are the legal options for, an athlete in a club versus an athlete in a school? How do the governing bodies come in now when they oversee coaches? What are the protections?
Sure. If a kid is part of a school program, it's governed by Title IX. The school has the responsibility to predict and prevent. They have to do something about it. They've got to give help and resources and counseling and whatever the kid needs to be able to continue their education. Clubs don't have to do anything, or I should say the national governing body. So clubs, they have the power to fire somebody. Kids can go to the police, but you may know that police are notoriously reluctant to prosecute those kinds of cases. I wish I had a better name for it, but I call them good molesters and bad molesters. So a bad molester is somebody who is just clumsy and grabs a kid and pulls them into a weight room and touches them inappropriately, and that kid runs to their parents and has no problem articulating what happened, and that person's in prison pretty quickly. But as we saw with, say, Jerry Sandusky or other coaches, they're very good at getting kids to be quiet and not report. So it's a good molester that's much more difficult. These are the coaches that move around from club to club, and they kind of get fired quietly, and when the parents find out what's going on, they're able to get hired someplace else because either they're a very good coach or they're charming or whatever. Those are the kinds of coaches that national governing bodies are the only entity that can do an investigation and get that coach out of the sport.
So by good, you mean effective, essentially, very effective.
Effective, yes. I mean over and over again.
Is that more common than the smart ones, as you say, are the good molesters?
Yeah, I think so. I'm a lawyer, and I look at what can I do to help people. I find that just in the past, I'd say really, maybe 6 years, that both men and women have lost that sense of shame of having been abused, and they are ready to come forward. And I find that a lot of times they come forward when they're either A, about 40 years old, or B, when they have children who are the same age that they were abused. And they can kind of look at their abuse through their child's eyes and see really how dumb that kid is, and that they really didn't have the type of say-so that the molester makes them think that they do. That's, again, who tends to call me, and sort of my focus is on how do you get them out of sport. Schools have figured out how to get them out of schools. Businesses have figured out how to get them out of businesses. There are special statutes that relate to prisoners. There are special statutes that relate to people who live in public housing. There's clergy have special responsibilities. Lawyers and physicians have special responsibilities. So I think it's only natural that coaches would too.
You mentioned that those groups you see, older adults coming to you and speaking out, and that it's become more common in the last 6 or 7 years. How common is this problem? Like, I know we've been hearing there's been big investigations, big stories in swimming and gymnastics in the last couple of years. Has this always been a problem and we're just finding out about it? Has it become more frequent? Like, how big a problem is this? Do all parents need to worry?
Yeah. Sexual abuse is always a problem when you have a power differential between the parties and power itself over one of the parties, right? So In clergy cases, it was a kid's desire to be close to God that made them very susceptible. In athletic cases, it's their desire to be a really great athlete that makes them susceptible to sexual abuse. In any school cases, etc., it is we as a society should expect to do very affirmative actions whenever there is a power differential. And frankly, in almost every other area of society, we already do. If I have a sexual romantic relationship with my clients, even though my client may be 50 years old, I can lose my license over that. Same with a counselor, same with a doctor, right? Because there are these other groups that investigate and sanction that behavior.
Right, and it only makes sense, especially with the power relationship, as you say, that coaches should be sanctioned as well.
Correct. We need to have a way of identifying that.
Absolutely. And so, Nancy, as a parent myself, is there anything I can do to protect my own child? And what do I look out for, or how do I educate her?
Well, a couple things. Number one is, everybody has heard you need to teach about good touch, bad touch. But by the time you've had a bad touch, the kid's already been molested. So you want to figure out before you get to bad touch. I have twin 11-year-old girls and a 16-year-old son. So what I tell them is what a good ethical coach or teacher or mentor will do and what somebody who's bad or unethical will do. And so you're trying to reach those behaviors long before the touching. So no good coach would ever text you by yourself. I don't care what the topic of the text is. They just don't text you individually. They would text you as part of the team group, but not individually. A good coach would not get you alone in a place by yourself. It's those kinds of physical boundary things that you teach kids that happen long before a touching happens. And for a kid to give voice to their own inner sense of what's right and wrong. So usually people kind of, light bulbs are going off. If a kid is in a kind of a family that's very authoritarian, not authoritative, but authoritarian, which means you, child, obey parent whenever, then it makes it very hard for them to trust their own voice. So we always let our kids decide whether or not to hug their grandparents goodbye, for them to have their own internal sense of it's my body and you may not tickle me. So at age 3, no, I don't want to be tickled. Okay. So it's those kinds of things.
On a legal standpoint, obviously those are all tips that are good tips for each individual family. But on a larger legal standpoint, where are we now in terms of governing bodies protections, in terms of, ethical oversight? I know we've been working on it for a few years. Where are we at now? Has it gotten better?
More like I've been working on it for 8 years. We're finally getting a safe sport, independent body that will do these investigations and sanctions. I have seen the latest draft, but it's very unclear as to whether it is going to apply to all national governing body members, or is it only going to apply to elite athletes? So there's just some questions, but it should be starting up soon, and we'll see if it is as effective as USADA, the United States Anti-Doping Agency.
Yeah, Nancy, it sounds like you're doing everything you can to help this cause, and we're really, really grateful for it. Do you need help? What do you think is the future in terms of how we bring this issue to the next level?
I do need help. Champion Women needs resources to be able to do our work. We have people here that like to get paid. We also, need to be working on the Hill in Washington, D.C. to try to see what changes need to be made to the Amateur Sports Act. And we have research assistants that work here. So seniors in sort of college age or law school type students are good for us.
Well, Nancy, thank you for everything that you're doing for this cause. Thank you for talking to us today and educating us, and we appreciate it all. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, I certainly learned a lot from that conversation.
Yeah, she had some very good points about what are the legal remedies, what are the holes. And, it's interesting because all the things she mentioned that are problems, the fact that there are no specific rules, that there is no overarching body that sees this, that bad coaches can just go from place to place. You see that in the massive scandal that happened in swimming, where they just kind of passed the buck for 10 years, and the huge number of abuse cases that have been found in gymnastics. There was that big investigation, and it was 300 and something over 20 years. And it was everything she talked about.
Yeah, that's in 20 years. I think it was 362. That is a lot of
I mean, and that's obviously
problems.
probably underreported.
Right.
Those are just the ones that have been reported. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we're a long way from being resolved, but it seems like we're on the path to more safety for kids in sport.
Right. And which is good.
Absolutely. So that's about it for this episode of Locker Room Talk. For more awesome women's sports coverage, go to wispsports.com. And of course, join me, Sarah Gross,
And Kelly O'Mara
in 2 weeks here in the Locker Room.